Thanks. Good morning, everybody. So, yes, I'm a longtime member of the Humanist community in Silicon Valley. I'd like to introduce our speaker today. She came all the way from Washington, D.C. She's out here on the West Coast promoting the work of the very important Secular Coalition for America. The Secular Coalition for America represents all of our secular groups in Washington, D.C. and fights back the incursions of fundamentalist religion into our political life and our legal system, and also tries to promote the progressive agendas that humanists support. Sarah, there's Sarah standing back there. Sarah Levin was born and raised in New Jersey and then raised in Philadelphia. She went to college at the American University in Washington, D.C. Because she was interested in international studies. Can you hear me in the back? Because she was interested in international studies, and American University is excellent in international studies. She also worked for AmeriCorps during her college years for 7 months in a local poor community near Washington, D.C., and she was president of the Secular Student Alliance on campus while she was there. Right out of her college, at age 22, she went to work for the Secular Coalition for America in Washington, D.C. to do the lobbying work that supports all of our efforts nationwide. Sarah has worked for the last 5 years, age 22 to age 27. She's now the ripe old age of 27 years old. One of our strongest national leaders in the secular movement, and one of the youngest. She, at the Secular Coalition, has been in various roles, starting as a lowly executive assistant, working her way up to the outreach coordinator, the state coordinator, the chief lobbyist, and the Grassroots coordinator, which she is now. Sarah goes around the country trying to develop the nationwide network at the local level and the state levels of the Secular Coalition and all of the secular organizations that belong to the Secular Coalition, which I think Sarah said was 19 different national organizations. They share space in Washington, D.C. with the Center for Inquiry, Dawkins Foundation, which is very mutually beneficial for both organizations. So we are very proud to welcome Sarah Levin to the Humanist community in Silicon Valley. She is here speaking to lots of different organizations. Right after this, after lunch, we're heading out to Sacramento to speak to all the secular organizations in Sacramento at the Reason Center out there today, this evening. So Sarah's got a very busy day. Please join me in welcoming the illustrious Sarah Levin from the Secular Coalition for America, here to tell us all about their exciting work. Thank you, Sarah.
That's not from here. Can everybody hear me? Okay, this is a funny handle. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming to learn more about the Secular Coalition for America. Let me just get a second to get settled with this. All right, we're in business. Great. Just by a show of hands, who's heard of the Secular Coalition for America before? Okay, that's about half the room. That's kind of what I've gotten through my travels in California so far, about half. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Secular Coalition for America, what we do, but the main point of my talk today is to talk to you about building political clout, and where we really need you as individuals to help support our lobbying work in D.C. So this is the mission statement of the Secular Coalition for America. I'm not going to read it to you, but it's really a two-part mission. We advocate for separation of church and state and evidence and science-based policy in Washington, D.C., but we're also a coalition of 19 national member organizations. I often get the question, what's the difference between you and Americans United for Separation of Church and State, which is a fantastic organization that we work very closely with in D.C. A huge difference between us and Americans United is that to be a voting member organization of the Secular Coalition, you have to in some way, shape, or form serve non-theists. Now, of course, supporting religious freedom, the way that we see religious freedom is protecting religious freedom for people of all faiths and none. But we were founded 17 years ago because we had all of these national organizations like American Atheist, American Humanist Association, who were saying we need to have a voice on Capitol Hill for non-theists, for atheists, agnostics, and humanists, because we know that there's a stigma attached to being non-religious, and there's all these nasty stereotypes out there about who we are, that, you know, we can't possibly have morals because we don't believe in a higher power, or, you know, that we're anti-religious, all of these sorts of things. And so in addition to advocating for positive policy changes that will protect the secular character of our government, a lot of what we do, and a big part of our mission stated here, is visibility of and respect for non-theistic viewpoints. So when we're meeting with members of Congress and their staff, we're not just talking to them about the issues, we're talking to them about our community. We're asking them, do you know what an atheist is? Do you know what a humanist is? And we're educating them on our community. And that's a really, really essential part of what we do. And that's a distinguishing factor between us and some other organizations that do support separation of church and state, but we're making sure that non-theists, everyone in this room, atheist groups, have a voice of their own and a seat at the table. If you don't remember anything else today about who we are, just remember that we're your lobbyists in Washington. Going a little bit deeper into what we do, I kind of break it down to three parts. Coalition building, I'm going to talk to you a lot about, because this is the kind of stuff that happens a lot behind the scenes. It's not always, you know, you're not going to see a press release or a lot of, you know, information about this, but I want to give you a sense of what's going on behind the scenes that make things work. So we lead, convene, and facilitate cooperation among our 19 national member organizations. When we were founded about 17 years ago, we only had about 4 members. That's grown to 19. You might have heard of a few of them: Freedom from Religion Foundation, American Atheist, Center for Inquiry, and Secular Student Alliance, and many, many more make up our membership. And they all do different things. They all serve different parts of the non-theistic community in different ways. But what brings us all together is the political agenda. Everyone wants to make sure that we have a voice on Capitol Hill, and that we're protecting the secular character of our government. We're luckily, in the last few years, we're not the only ones lobbying now. We have 4 other organizations who are our members who have hired full-time lobbyists, which is fantastic, because we could use 50 lobbyists in DC to deal with what we're dealing with daily in terms of attacks on our, the secular character of our government. But someone has to convene them. We have to use our resources to respond to these things daily. And I'm going to give you a few examples in a minute about how we do that behind the scenes. Lobbying, of course, we lobby Capitol Hill and the White House. When I was our chief lobbyist, that was actually part of my job, was going weekly to the White House Office of Public Engagement under the Obama administration. We have not been invited back. So we don't currently have as many relationships with this administration as the past one, as you can imagine, but we do have lots of friends on Capitol Hill. Has anyone heard of the Congressional Freethought Caucus? Only 4 people. Okay, I'm really excited to tell you about this. So first I want to tell you what a Congressional Caucus is. So members of Congress, they form basically groups, interest groups, and that's the caucus, around all kinds of interest areas. It might be identity-based, like the Congressional Black Caucus or the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. It might be issue-based, like an agricultural caucus if they come from a very agro-heavy state. It might be based around being a member who serves in a border state. And it might be a bipartisan caucus. There's an addiction recovery caucus. There's lots and lots of them. But basically, they serve as a way for members of Congress to get together around a common interest and to come up with priorities priorities for that area. And this is really important for outside advocacy groups like us, because that gives direct access to members of Congress who have publicly stated as public members of these caucuses that this is a priority for them. And it's a jumping off point to introduce legislation. And so last year, at our Secular Awards Dinner, which is part of our annual lobby day where people fly in from all across the country to meet with their members of Congress in D.C., Congressman Huffman, who's from California, announced at our awards dinner that he was establishing a Congressional Freethought Caucus with 3 other members. That's now grown to 12 members of Congress that are publicly part of this Freethought Caucus. I can't express enough how huge this is for our community. We've always had allies, over here, and we build those relationships, but having a group of members of Congress who have specifically in the mission statement of the Freethought Caucus say that they want to advocate for the rights of non-theists and advocate for separation of church and state is huge, and it's historical. And that means that we're now in a position this year to not just beat back bad legislation that's coming from the opposition, but introducing legislation that promotes our agenda. So we're now able to go more on the offensive than instead of being on defense. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then finally, grassroots advocacy. That's my role right now. I was our lobbyist for a while, but I much prefer dealing with volunteers and grassroots, so I made them hire lobbyists so I could do this full time. And so we train, empower, and mobilize secular constituents to make their voices heard on Capitol Hill. And this is actually the crux of my talk today is going to be about why this matters so much. All of these things kind of feed into each other. When we walk into an office with a member of Congress or their staff, the degree to which we're really bending their ear, the degree to which we have any political clout, is pretty much determined by how many secular constituents they've heard from at home. So they may align with us, they might have a great voting record, they might be progressive, but if we want them to push our agenda and they've never heard from a single secular constituent, we're not going to get very far. And it sounds a little bit cynical, but members of Congress are always thinking about the next election, right? They're thinking about how they're going to get reelected. So people who show up at their offices, people who call them, people who write letters to the editor, those people are signaling to them, I am a voter. If I'm going to show up at your office, you can bet I'm going to show up on election day. And I'm watching your voting record. So it doesn't matter if I say to them, hey, the religiously unaffiliated are the largest, fastest growing in the country. We skew young, 1 in 3 millennials is religiously unaffiliated. That could be true, but that doesn't matter to them if they have never heard from secular constituents in their district. And if you think about our politics right now, there's a very dangerous assumption that I keep hearing people say, which is, oh, well, because we're growing in numbers and the evangelicals are shrinking, the country will just be secular pretty soon. It'll just happen on its own. That is not true. Think about our politics right now. I can name a number of issues. I'm sure you can think of some where the majority of Americans are over here, but the policy is over here. Where a minority that's very powerful and very organized and well-funded is driving policy when it's in a direction that is not in line with the majority of Americans. Being the majority does not give you power. It doesn't. Being organized, speaking with one voice, and engaging directly in politics, talking to your members of Congress, talking to candidates, that's where you get power. So I'll give you an example of this in action. We've done a lot of work on vaccines and trying to repeal non-medical vaccine exemptions. California, congratulations, you repealed yours. So you're now one of only 3 states in the country that doesn't have religious exemptions for vaccines, and a number of states also have philosophical or personal belief exemptions. So in Oregon, a lawmaker introduced legislation to repeal Oregon's non-medical exemptions. And the majority of people in Oregon support vaccines. In fact, the majority of Americans support vaccines. But a bunch of anti-vax parents got really, really organized and showed up to her offices and sent lots of letters. And even though they were not representing the majority of Oregonians, I don't know how you say that, not only did she, maybe a lawmaker in that position would just maybe not elevate it as their top priority. Maybe I will do that next session. She withdrew the legislation altogether. It's not that she just let it lie. She withdrew it because of the immense amount of pressure from the anti-vaxxers. The anti-vaxxers are a really great example of this because they are they're a minority, but they're very well funded, they're very well organized. They get their folks to show up. Pro-vaccine people are sort of like a silent majority, and that's why they've made so much headway, and it's very, very dangerous. So I just want to use that. I'm telling this to you because that's why you, as an individual constituent, matter so much. If you contact your home district office, I'm going to be talking about this later, even once a year, have one meeting with your member of Congress or their staff in your home district. That gives us so much more clout when we walk into that office because they've heard from somebody. I've sat across the table from the Chief of Staff for Senator Cortez Masto when I was doing introductory meetings, and this was when she had just won her Senate seat. And I told him about all our agenda items, and he basically said to me, he said, "We're very aligned with you, but it'd be really helpful if we got a few letters from constituents at home," which was his way of saying, hey, we're aligned with you, but I'm not really going to push the issues that you care about unless I start hearing from some constituents. So it really does matter. So I'm going to, back to coalition building a little bit, just so you know what we do. Here's all of our member organizations. You might notice, you might recognize a few of these. If you don't, if you're interested in learning more about any of these, please let me know. I'm happy to talk to you about them. A few weeks ago in February, we had our annual members meeting where the executive directors of all of these member organizations come to DC and we facilitate a collaborative event where we share what we're doing, we discuss our common challenges, we share and celebrate our successes, and most importantly, we talk about how to work more closely together, especially, of course, on our lobbying agenda. So here's a picture of all the executives, plus a few board members of all these organizations. You might recognize Annie Laurie Gaylor next to me from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. I wanted to show you this one because I look normal in it, and somebody made me laugh in this one. So, and then here's just some of the summit and the members meeting in action. This is Roy Speckhart, Executive Director of the American Humanist Association. That's Robin Blumner. In this session, we were mapping our grassroots programs to see to be able to visibly see where there was overlap, where we could be working closely together, and where there wasn't a lot of activity that maybe we needed to invest more resources. So that one over there that Robin's in front of says businesses, and we noticed and had a discussion about how the movement is not really engaging businesses, small or large, which we know is important. If you've paid attention to some of the RFRA bills, the anti-LGBT bills, Georgia, both chambers had a Religious Freedom Restoration Act that would just broadly allow discrimination on the basis of religion. And the Senate passed it, and the House passed it, and the governor vetoed it, not because he's pro-LGBT, not because he cares about true religious freedom, but because he was afraid of how the businesses pulling out of Georgia would impact his state. He didn't want Georgia to be impacted the way North Carolina was when it considered a similar bill. So doing outreach to businesses is important. And then up here you can see that's where we had our lobbyist panel sharing with all these executives what the challenges are, what the opportunities are in terms of legislation. We also had a legal panel where they were talking about upcoming cases and legal strategy given the new makeup of the Supreme Court and how they're packing the lower courts as well. So, lobbying. This is actually also part of the members' meeting. So after this whole weekend where we talk about collaboration, we actually got meetings with members of the Congressional Freethought Caucus to meet with all the executive directors to learn more about what they're doing and build that relationship. So here's Congressman Raskin, who's one of the founding members, and then you can't really see him, he's up there, he's the tall guy in the back, Congressman Huffman. The two of them co-chair the Congressional Freethought Caucus. Congressman Raskin is from Maryland. So I'm going to give you one example of how our work as a coalition matters, and it's something very behind the scenes that you're not necessarily going to hear about, but I'll share with you today. So in 2017, when the administration, or really any administration, wants the media and lobbyists and advocates to miss something, they drop it on a Friday. especially if that Friday is a 3-day weekend. So during the Friday before Columbus Day weekend of 2017, the Trump administration dropped 2 big bombs. One of them was the Health and Human Services issuing a new rule restricting access to birth control, and the other was the Department of Justice issuing a memorandum on religious liberty. All of the media attention, most of the big groups like ACLU and Planned Parenthood were paying attention to the birth control rule. Nobody was paying attention to the memorandum except the Secular Coalition and our member organizations. And that memorandum was hugely important because it was instructing all of the executive agencies in the Trump administration to interpret religious freedom in the most extreme way possible in the process of implementing regulations. And this is stuff that's really hard to catch because it's, you know, there's so many regulations and rules that are you know, result of many different parts of the law, and it's hard to catch, you know, how they're implementing this stuff. So having the Department of Justice tell all these instruct all of these agencies to interpret it in this way was really dangerous. And it's like a 15-20 page document. It looks like if the Christian right had written a letter to Santa Claus with all the things they'd like, it was all in there. It was terrible. So we had a really tight timeline. So it comes down on Friday. In about a week and a half or 2 weeks later, Attorney General Sessions, not with us anymore, he had his first public hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee, which was a really big deal because that was the first opportunity for the public to see senators ask him questions on the record in front of cameras about all these issues. Our goal was in that 1.5, 2 week period to educate the members of Congress who serve on the Senate Judiciary Committee and their staff about this memorandum, and to get at least one senator to ask the Attorney General about the memorandum during that hearing. And that was really hard because if you think about it and what was going on at that time, I mean, this was an opportunity for senators to ask about DACA, to ask about guns, to ask about drug policy. There was so much going on, and there were going to be so many other interest groups that were trying to vie for their questions and their issues to be elevated during that hearing, and it was the first one. So we needed to get this on the radar. In order to accomplish this, a few things had to happen. We had to do an analysis of this memorandum and boil it down to one page. This is a lot of what lobbyists do because members of Congress and their staff, they have to make decisions on every single issue that they have to vote on, but they're people. They're not experts on everything. So the member of Congress and their staff maybe have their pet issues that they're experts on, but with everything else, they have to go really wide and not very deep, which is why lobbying, half of it isn't even just asking to support or oppose legislation. It's actually education and establishing yourself as a subject matter expert so that they can lean on you when they have to do their research before making a recommendation to their boss on how to vote on a bill. And so, but they're not going to read this whole memorandum. You know, sending the document to them like, hey, you should read this would not have worked because they don't have time for that. We know how they operate. So part of what we do is we synthesize and make into something digestible these kind of lengthy documents so that we can highlight what's really important. So we had to do an analysis and a one-pager on that. We had to schedule meetings with all of the staff members whose bosses were on Senate Judiciary in that next week or two to have a meeting to talk to them about this. And we had to draft questions, suggested questions that we wanted the senators to ask of Attorney General Sessions. This would not have been possible if just one organization was trying to do it all in this time period. But we came together, most of us had off, but we still, on Columbus Day, but we still had a call, divvied up the work, figured it out. Not only did we accomplish all of that, but not one, but 3 senators asked Attorney General Sessions about this memo, and Senator Hirono actually used our question verbatim. I was watching the hearing and I like jumped out of my chair. I was like, oh, that's our question. It was really exciting. And I give you that example because, again, that is not possible when we're not working together. And so having a coalition, the Secular Coalition, convening these groups is really important. So for the last few years, we've been convening the lobbyists and lawyers that call themselves the cabal. monthly to make sure that we're able to respond in that way, that we're sharing our intel, and that we're able to accomplish more together. So I'm just going to give you a few tidbits of that memo that I think are the most enraging, although there was a lot in there. I'm not going to read this out to you, but the translation of this is basically the Department of Justice saying that the government shouldn't discriminate against nonprofits, and say a nonprofit getting a grant from the government or a business getting a contract, that the government, if that contractor or nonprofit wants to discriminate on the basis of religion, that if the government were to say, we don't do business with you if you discriminate, that's discrimination. And so the government should not, basically distinguish between discriminating contractors and discriminating nonprofits and those who don't discriminate, because that in this administration is considered discrimination. Here's my favorite. RFRA, by the way, for those of you who don't know, is Religious Freedom Restoration Act. That was actually the basis of the Supreme Court's Hobby Lobby decision, where they decided that, yes, a corporation has religious beliefs and can impose those religious beliefs on their employees. So it says, RFRA does not permit the federal government to second-guess the reasonableness of a religious belief. I just hadn't seen that phrase before, and I thought it was pretty crazy, so I wanted to share that with you. Okay, so talking about mobilizing constituents. So I mentioned before that we are the largest and fastest growing religious demographic in the country, right? About 1 in 4 Americans is religiously unaffiliated, 1 in 3 millennials are also, so we skew young, we're, most secular generation, right? So I have a question for all of you. If the religiously unaffiliated are the largest, fastest growing demographic of the country, why don't we have more political influence? Just shout it out. Money?
No, they don't vote.
They don't vote? What? We're not organized?
We don't recognize ourselves as a voting bloc, as a group that we are loyal to.
Right? Anything else?
The traditional logic is that you can't get elected if you are an atheist.
Right. Okay. All good answers. So one person definitely nailed it on the head. There's many reasons, but one of the biggest one is voter turnout. The evangelicals are beating the religiously unaffiliated about 2 to 1 at the polls. So we have a huge gap. So again, it doesn't really matter that we're on the rise in numbers if we're not voting, because politicians care about who's voting. So we try to address this with the Secular America Votes program that we started last year with a number of our member organizations, where we had local groups, and we really emphasized that they, what you said about recognizing yourself as a voting bloc. We had those shirts back there. We handed them out to folks who were doing voter registration for free, and we worked with our member organizations to make sure if they had any t-shirts, buttons, stickers that they could give to local groups doing voter registration for free, that they do that, because we wanted not just to get involved in voter registration to close this gap, but we also wanted to use it as an opportunity to show visibility as a constituency. I've been in the room with senators talking about their upcoming races, and they just talk over, especially Democrats, talk a lot about voter registration, voter registration, voter registration, because that's, voter turnout is a big determining factor of whether or not, especially in tough places like Arizona or Nevada, if they're going to be able to win. And so you can bet that if voter registration is on their mind for their races, whatever local groups or local nonprofits or national organizations that are actually helping them to do voter registration, who are sending people out in the places where they're running to knock on doors, they have access to those members of Congress. And they owe them, right? Because they help them get elected by doing voter registration, getting out the vote. So voter registration, it puts you on the map as a constituency that has ground game, that actually shows up, that can actually impact elections. And so we as a community need to be way more engaged than we already are in voter registration and getting out the vote. And when we do it, we need to do it as humanists, as atheists, as secular people, because otherwise our identity just disappears with us and people don't know that we're actually here representing our values. And the other great thing is it's a good way to get visibility for your local group. So I like to use the grocery store example. Say, you know, this group, you had a few of you, you know, wear T-shirts and you go to the grocery store and you table and just to talk about humanism. Well, people would think that's a little odd. You know, they're there to buy their eggs and milk. Why are you here to talk to me about humanism? I'm doing my shopping. But you take the same group of people with the same T-shirts, but their table is trying to register you to vote. Is that odd? No, because it's normalized. People know that people who do voter registration are just going where the people are. So you just took the same group of people wearing the same shirts but doing a different activity, and all of a sudden you you know, your presence there is normalized. And you can bet if 5 of you are registering voters but you're wearing the same shirt that says humanist on it, somebody's probably going to ask you what a humanist is and what your group is about. So it's kind of a sneaky way to get some face time with people in the community and educate them about your community, even though the real reason you're there is to register people to vote. And also, what a great first impression for people who have never even heard of our movement, that the first time they interface with a person who's a non-theist, that they're just there to register them to vote, you know? And we still have to do what we can to eliminate the stigma about who we are and fight back the stereotype that we don't care, that we don't have morals and all those sorts of things. So I'm actually going to just skip ahead to this. So we actually got the program covered by the Wall Street Journal, which was pretty cool. You can see the shirts that are back there and there. And it was our first year, so you know we weren't able to change the whole elections. You know, we were just doing this for the first time, but we did hold 34 registration drives in 15 states, all done by local groups like yours. So I do hope that you think about, as a group, getting engaged in the 2020 elections by getting out the vote and doing voter registration, maybe in areas that really need it in California that aren't Silicon Valley. Where were we? Okay, so we were talking about why we don't have more political influence. So I want to show you some statistics that, at least when I first looked at them, really gave me pause. We're never going to have the same identity, because let me just talk about religiously unaffiliated for a second. We use that term because that's what Pew and the Public Religion Research Institute use. I wish we had our own, big operation to do surveys and ask the questions the way we would ask them and all that sort of stuff, and use our own terminology, but that's where we get most of our data. So when Pew and PRI use religiously unaffiliated, they're actually talking about not just non-theists, they're talking about people who are just unaffiliated with religion. About a third of the unaffiliated say they don't believe in God. An even smaller amount of those who say they don't believe in God use a label like atheist or agnostic or humanist. That other 2/3 of people ranges from people who believe in God but are just not are unaffiliated with religion. They might be spiritual but not religious. They might say, I don't know, I don't care, I'm not sure, and everything in between. So that 1 in 4 Americans encapsulates all of those people. And we're never going to get all of those people to identify with a single word. Even the LGBT community, if we could get an LGBT sort of thing, like where it's like all the different labels together and get everybody to say that, that'd be great. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. But what's amazing is that we, as a block of people, agree in unity on the issues more than the evangelicals do. So take a look at these numbers. 74% of the religiously unaffiliated support abortion in all or most cases, while 61% of evangelicals oppose it. That's more than a 10-point difference. And then think about our politics for a second and how much influence the evangelicals have and how organized and united they seem on abortion. But we agree in more unison than even they do. 85% of the religiously unaffiliated support same-sex marriage, while 59% of evangelicals oppose same-sex marriage. And that's been going down even more because the younger evangelicals are splitting with the older generations of evangelicals. Again, look at that difference. But then think about our politics. 83% of the religiously unaffiliated say that employers who have a religious objection to birth, sorry, I should have fixed that, let's just say birth control, not birth, should be required to provide it in health insurance plans for their employees, while 53% of evangelicals say they should be able to refuse it. So I show this to you, and I actually want to also point out, I ran out of copies, unfortunately, but if you'd like me to send some to the group, let me know, I'll ship them. This is our Model Secular Policy Guide. It has every single issue that our organization takes a position on, and what our policy recommendation is to lawmakers. The audience for this book is lawmakers. It's like, you know, if you want a perfect secular America, here you go. You know, follow all of these recommendations. This is a document that we work on with our member organizations. It spans health policy, tax policy, military, you know, all kinds of issues across the spectrum. And all of our 19 national member organizations, even though they're of different non-theistic persuasions and they organize differently and they identify differently, about 95% agree. They agree with about 95%, if not 100%, of the issues in this book. The fact that we as a bloc of people agree to this extent on so many different issues is where we have an opportunity for strength. Because we may not be like the evangelicals where we all have the same beliefs and identity and we do exactly what our pastors do, but if you look at these numbers, we have the potential to be not just as strong as them, but even stronger. But only if we unite on the issues rather than focusing on identity. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about later about our messaging strategy for this, which is Secular Values Voter, where we're focusing on the values that unite us and the issues that unite us instead of focusing on just the identity piece. I'm jumping around a little bit, sorry about that. So political clout. So I talked a little about electoral ground game. I want to talk a little bit about building relationships with lawmakers and party organizers. Party organizing, and that's going to address some of the other things you shouted out about money, about what else? There was money, voting, and there was one more I'll remember later. Okay, so home district ground game. This is what I was talking about earlier in terms of when we walk into an office and if they've heard from secular constituents. So we built a program called the Rapid Response Program, and the vision is to have a team of secular constituents in all 435 congressional districts in the country. It doesn't have to be 50 people. It doesn't even have to be 10 people. If we have 2 or 3 people that are meeting in person in the home district at least once or twice a year with the staff there, that makes a huge difference. So we have in the back you can sign up for action alerts, and in the last column it says rapid response. So if you want to sign up for this, just put yes. The difference between our action alerts and rapid response is that action alerts, they make advocacy really easy. They're really great for getting our voices heard. That's the kind of message you might get by email or by text that says, hey, contact your member of Congress. You put in your address. There's a pre-written letter that you can edit if you want, and you send it off. And it takes like less than a minute to send a letter to your member of Congress. So if you want to get signed up for that, you can sign up in the back. But this is next level activism because, you know, in levels of impact, those letters are impactful, but even more impactful than those are phone calls. And the most impactful thing you can do in terms of building political clout for the secular community is face-to-face meetings. And I actually want to use that as an opportunity to show you a video that talks about our lobby day. We have an annual lobby day where we bring constituents from all over the country to pre-scheduled meetings with both of their Senate offices and their members.
Now more than any time I can ever remember, we need people engaged because the stakes have never been higher.
Thank you all for being here tonight.
This year marks the 15th year anniversary of the Secular Coalition for America.
In the beginning, we were working just to be able to hire one lobbyist because we were all volunteers. Each year, we continue to grow. I see a bright future for us.
Today, we represent 18 national non-theistic organizations. We represent the largest religious demographic in the United States.
Well, the United States of America is not a theocracy, and on our watch it never will be.
We talk so often about our shared secular values. Those values include freedom, inclusion, equality, and knowledge. It's a uniquely wonderful thing when we have lawmakers who not only share those values, but they live those values.
And a secular person has just as good a claim to understanding the truth as a person who is religious, correct?
Well, I'm not sure. For the last 5 years that I've been a member of the State House, I am the only member in the Pennsylvania General Assembly that doesn't swear in on a book of faith. And Secular Coalition is an organization that has supported legislators like me.
We hope to see you all at Lobby Day tomorrow.
The thing that makes me feel good about the work that I do is when I can meet with our supporters who come in for our lobby day.
Good morning, everyone.
We spend the morning really focusing on the issues that we care about. We have policy experts come in.
I think it's great that the Secular Coalition of America is standing up for the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the secular principles advanced by our founders.
The values and the mission of this group is something that I firmly believe in.
We learn how to talk about the issues in ways that will make a difference on Capitol Hill.
I just wanted to come and highlight the importance of your work, the importance of this organization.
We also train people about what to expect during a meeting.
Whether you have the opportunity to meet with a member of Congress, him or herself, or whether you meet with one of those individual staffers, take the time during your meeting to build that personal relationship.
But I want to reiterate something that I said at the top of the morning, which is to have fun.
We march to Capitol Hill.
This is really just very exciting. This is what makes things tick.
It's a moment that I want people to remember for the rest of their lives.
As a citizen of the U.S., you have the right to speak to your representative.
Just state what's important to you and your values.
It is very important to talk with your legislators, let them know what your issues are.
And so it's not just about turning back the tide. It's about creating a ripple that we won't be able to control.
We're giving voice to a huge number of Americans who may not feel necessarily like anybody is speaking on their behalf.
We can be the next powerhouse constituency.
It's really important that we get out here and we talk to our representatives and let them know that we're here in our communities. We are a large, growing demographic, and that's why we need you to get out there and show your face.
And going into the future, I feel really good about where our community can go, because we'll be leading, not following, and not sitting on the sidelines.
Can you hear me okay? Okay. Oops. What we want to do is with the lobby day, you know, people come to DC and that's great, but not everyone can come to DC to meet with their members, and you don't have to. All of your members of Congress have a DC office, but they also have an office in your home district. Raise your hand if you've ever visited your member of Congress's office in the home district. Hey, like 6 or 7 people, that's great. 8? Yeah, that's great. So all of you, I'd like to talk to you after this about that, because what we do with our rapid responders is we already have to put together all of these sorts of materials about things we're working on. So right now, for example, we're pushing the Freedom of Religion Act. The Freedom of Religion Act, introduced by Congressman Beyer in Virginia, would basically undo the Muslim ban. It prohibits a religious test for entering the country, and it specifically mentions non-theists in the language of the bill. So it's a fantastic bill. It's been introduced before, but because we now have a Democratic majority in the House, this year it actually has a chance to pass. And so we're really pushing it forward, trying to get as many co-sponsors and supporters as we can. So when we are lobbying on something, we have, you know, our one-pager legislative brief, we'll have talking points, fact sheets, all that sort of stuff. So if you're a rapid responder, you sign up, you get one training, it's only 20 or 30 minutes, where we train you on how to actually schedule the meeting and all the little, you know, tips and tricks of the trade and all that sort of stuff. We will send you, like I just the other week sent to our rapid responders, a rapid action, and ask them to schedule a home district meeting. I said, here's the fact sheet, here's the talking points. We want you to ask your member to co-sponsor the Freedom of Religion Act. If they already have, thank them. Always use it as an opportunity also to talk about yourself as a secular constituent and the community that you're part of. Every single meeting that we have, we use it as an opportunity to educate about our community in addition to the issues. And who better than to do that than you as locals who are their constituents, to talk to them about this community and being part of the humanist community, what that means to you. So we would send you with those talking points, you go have the meeting, but it's not just a one-way communication. You serve as a rapid responder a really important role in feeding back to us on how that meeting went. So it's kind of a way of collecting intel. So if the person was really hostile to you for some reason, that's good for us to know. If they had a question that you didn't know the answer to, that's something for us to work with you to follow up, to make sure they have that question answered. Again, lobbying, a huge part of it is establishing yourself as a trusted, credible subject matter expert who they can come to, and we've done that in Washington. So now, Congress, members of Congress will call us about issues that they know we have expertise on to see what the secular perspective is. So you can do that as well. You don't have to have, a PhD, or, or in theology or anything like that to be to have some expertise. Because remember, these are folks who can only go so wide on all of these issues, or can only go so wide, and they can only go so deep on the issues. And so we do have that expertise to give to them. So say this rapid responder comes back to us and say they had this question, and another rapid responder does. Well, maybe over time we realize, okay, this is a concern, or this is a question that's coming up a lot. We need to adjust our talking points. We need to adjust our brief to address this, and we need to meet with these offices to clarify this issue. For example, maybe they were really, really friendly to you. Maybe they said, "Oh, I think my boss would support it." Well, if they said something like that, then we want to make sure we're following up with a meeting in D.C. and say, hey, I know that you just met with a constituent, and that they expressed that you might be supportive of this, and so we wanted to follow up and talk to you about it. It's those kinds of things where it's not just us asking you to go do something, but you're really a part of our lobbying team in D.C. Because that's really, really important information for us to use as we lobby. The other thing is to think about with the home district offices is they serve a really important purpose because, again, politicians are thinking about the next election. The home district is, the staff there are the ones who kind of keeping a pulse on where the constituents are because they're on the ground in the district. So they're the eyes and ears for the DC office. And so they always want to know, are constituents very happy? Are they very unhappy with the member? Or are there issues coming up that the member might need to respond to that are local? To show that they're still engaged and to actually do something about the things that their constituents care about. And so if we have a presence in the home district, then that's why that goes even further than just coming to DC. Coming to DC once a year and doing those meetings and never contact your members of Congress again versus doing one home district meeting and following up a few times with that staffer by email, way, way more impactful. Way more impactful, although doing both is great. And also the difference between the action alerts and the home district meetings. Again, the action alerts, they are really impactful, especially when we get them in volume, but they basically take your message and go through the web forms of their websites. So we make it really easy for you to do that. But with rapid response, what you're doing is you're having a meeting, you take their card, and then you go back home and you follow up with them by email and say, hey, Joe, it's really great to meet you. Thank you for taking time to talk to me about the humanist community in Silicon Valley and the Freedom of Religion Act. Here's an attachment of the brief that I gave you. Let me know if you have any further questions. And then maybe you follow up a few weeks later or a month later. If what's the local paper here? The what? San Jose Mercury. So maybe the San Jose Mercury editorial board does a piece on an issue that is relevant. So you might use that as an excuse to follow up and say, hey, Joe, I want to make sure that you saw that the editorial board of the San Jose Mercury is actually supporting our issue. It's not that time consuming. It's really just that meeting and then the follow-up in between. But you're building a relationship with a person, an actual person who has seen your face, who knows your name. When they get your email, they've had a previous email exchange with you. That's way more impactful than just, I can tell you because I wasn't a Senate intern, and my job, a big part of it during my internship was to take in those mass emails that came through the web forms and assign them to the right legislative correspondent who either would send a form letter back, and if there hadn't been a form letter written on that particular issue, then they had to figure one out and get it approved and send it out. So that, again, still has impact, especially if you're contacting offices about things that they have no form letter to respond with. So that means they have to think about it and take a position if they haven't taken a position yet. But again, having that in-person meeting is really, really impactful. And they're going to tell the DC office about that, especially if that's happening regularly. So I do encourage you to sign up for Rapid Response, or at least our action alerts. It's hugely important, and it really does determine to a great extent how impactful we can be as registered lobbyists in DC. So I've talked about Rapid Response, I've talked about Secular America Votes. This is a picture of a bunch of secular Democrats at the Texas Democratic Party convention in 2018. And what they're looking at is this line of candidates running for various offices in Texas coming into this room to try to convince these people to vote for them and support their campaigns. And we had actually already scheduled about 5 candidates to speak, but the other candidates milling around the convention saw that this room was overflowing, and they came to us and say, hey, can we talk to your people? Which, you know, if you think about that for a second, how important it is that candidates for office are saying, oh, wow, this is a room full of people who are here, and they're united by the fact that they're secular and they want separation of church and state. This is an active group. This is a constituency that I need to think about when I'm figuring out my outreach strategy on my campaign. So this was the 2018 convention, and it's standing room only. A lot of people couldn't get in. It was the same in 2016, which was the first time that we ever did this. Okay, I'm out of time? Okay, I'll wrap it up. 5 minutes, got it. Okay. So, what we did is we had 3 volunteers who were in Texas, but they also happened to be active in their political party. So they got a Secular Caucus on the schedule, and the Secular Coalition put together 6 policy planks or resolutions that anybody could print out and take to their precinct or county conventions, and they were all on issues of separation of church and state. So in 2016, we not only had the caucus, but one little precinct county had accepted 3 of our resolutions, and they were ultimately accepted and incorporated into the Texas Democratic Party's platform, including a call to remove the religious test for office in the Texas state constitution. All of that was made possible just because we had 3 people who were insiders who were active in the Democratic Party. And so my ask to you is, if you are involved in your political party, and we're nonpartisan, we established a few weeks later a Secular Caucus at the National Libertarian Convention. If you're a secular libertarian, secular Republican, secular Green, secular Democrat, we will work with you as long as you want to advocate for separation of church and state within the party. So the purpose of this program is to address the other aspect of politics, which is the candidate pipeline. Candidates look to their parties for support. Pretty much any, I can't speak for the other parties, but for the Democratic Party, pretty much any state Democratic Party, you'll find an LGBT caucus, you'll find a women's caucus, and what do? They educate and they promote they pressure the party to do better on the issues they care about, right? They influence the platform to be more pro-LGBT, more pro-women's rights. They push the party to have more women candidates, more LGBT candidates. So it's an internal structure that influences the party from the inside. And so what we want to do with this program is to educate party leadership about who we are as a community, put ourselves on the map as a constituency, influence candidates. And what I'm really excited about is that the leadership of this caucus is starting to look at starting a PAC. And starting a PAC would mean that they would have actual money and resources to give to openly non-theistic candidates running for office in Texas. But it all starts from finding these folks, people, and there's tons of them, look at this room, but finding them, getting them organized, getting them the resources so that they can influence the candidate pipeline, the party platform, and the party leadership from the inside. So if that applies to you or anybody you know, let me know. We'd be happy to work with you. I know I'm really running out of time, so I'm going to just see what's left here. I'm going to skip this. I'm happy to talk to you about the Southern California Regional Leadership Summit we just did. We brought 20 organizers together in Temecula last weekend to collaborate, and we got some press from it. The Religious News Service actually covered it just a few days ago. And then I know I only have a few minutes left, but I wanted to get to this. So I talked earlier about how we're united by issues. So the Secular Coalition, we challenged ourselves to be able to talk about any issue in this 40-page document in terms of one or more values. And so we came up with these 4: freedom, inclusion, equality, and knowledge. We define them in very specific ways so that we can talk about all these different issues. So for example, here's one way we might use it. I support patients' rights. Right there, very few people will disagree with you because everyone's been a patient and they support patients' rights, right? So when it comes to your healthcare decisions, the only beliefs that matter are yours. Again, very kind of individualistic American way. And then a medical provider's religion shouldn't prevent patients from accessing care. Freedom, beliefs protected, not imposed. So I'm not going to go through all 4 of them, but I wanted to show you this to address the side of political clout which has to do with being united and an organized, united voice. And one of the ways that we need to do that is to find a way to reach all these unaffiliated people who aren't necessarily come to meetings like this. And maybe they don't want to because that's just not the most important thing in their life. But we do know from the data that they agree on all of these issues. So if we can reach them on the issues, knowing full well that there's still a lot of people who don't feel comfortable, don't care enough to start with their identity, then we're leading instead with values and with ideas that are connected to those values. And I just encourage you when you're having conversations with people and with neighbors and friends and you're trying to get them to think about these issues, leading with something that's very hard to disagree with. Because if you flip this, if you had started by saying a medical provider's religion shouldn't prevent patients from accessing care, you lose a lot of people. Not even because they necessarily disagree with you, but they're going to start making a lot of assumptions about what you're about to say and where you're coming from. So you want to start with something that everybody can sort of agree on and lead into how it's a uniting value that you both share. And I have a few other examples of that, but I don't think I have time to talk about it. So what you can do today to make a difference, please donate. I have donation slips with us. You can donate if you want it to be tax deductible. We can do that. We do have the Secular Coalition Education Fund. If you want to donate to our direct lobbying work, that is not tax deductible, and we accept those donations as well to our 501c4. So please, grab one of these. I also can take credit cards as well and debit cards. So donate, sign up for action alerts. Again, that's on the clipboard in the back. Sign up to be a rapid responder. That's the last column that says rapid responder. Just put a yes. And if you are active in your political party, please come talk to me. If you prefer not to get emails and you're already getting too many emails, you can actually just sign up by texting secular to 52886 and you'll get our action alerts from there. So thank you so much for having me today. Happy to answer questions.
What about the presidential candidates? Are they Bible thumpers or closet atheists? Can you get that kind of information for us? Is that available?
Generally, when we know that someone is a closeted atheist, we don't make that public information, or else lawmakers would never share that information with us in the first place. So we know that there's a lot of closeted atheists on the Hill, but we would never disclose that publicly.
The question has never been brought up to these guys?
The presidential candidates, I'm sure it has. I'm sure it has. But, I would say that pragmatically, the most important thing is that we have allies who are going to support the separation of church and state. It doesn't really matter if they're a theist or a non-theist, as long as they're willing to stand up for non-theists. So I would look more at their...
Any more questions? We're running over, so I'm going to give about 5 extra minutes or so.
Okay. I'm a donor for the Secular Coalition for America. Just want you to see my T-shirt I got.
Yes, those are available for $25. Yes, please. Thank you, Jeff. And those are available for a $25 suggested donation.
Yeah. Also, I read Obama's biography very carefully on that subject of whether he was a closeted atheist, and he was not. but his mother was actually non-secular, and he sort of decided to become a Christian at age 28. And you have to read his words directly to understand the whole logic, because he is a very rational person. Okay, well, I'll let it stand there and let the next person go.
Who's next?
About how many members of Congress are in this secular caucus?
12.
2 of them are in the Bay Area.
Yes, Congresswoman Lofgren and Congressman Huffman, who helped found it.
Any other questions?
Is there any movement to try and get "In God We Trust" removed from our money?
There always is, but I have to say, again, being pragmatic, if we were to make that our only issue and put all our resources into that, members of Congress wouldn't want to touch us with a 10-foot pole, to be honest. I think that that's a great goal in the long term, but we do not have the political clout to be making those demands right now. In my view, we have to do more as a community to change the court of public opinion on "In God We Trust" and "Under God," and educate them to mitigate that perceived political risk by members. Why would you stick your neck out and do something that's so easily talked about, that's so easily attacked as anti-religious, instead of doing your million other priorities for your other constituents. So I think we have to do better as a community to educate, and because a lot of people don't know that "In God We Trust" and "Under God" weren't always there, that it's a relic of McCarthyism in the 50s. But we haven't we have to change people's opinions, because the moment that it is no longer politically risky and it's, everyone around us, not just our insular community, is saying how ridiculous this is, then we're going to have the wiggle room to actually ask members of Congress to do something about it. But when we bring up those issues, I mean, the response is, we're looking at things like, people not being able to afford their housing. We're looking at people, we're looking at what's going on at the border. We're looking at all these issues, and you want to talk about what's on the money? It's not a political winner right now. But we need to do our part to educate the community. So what I would say is, rather than making it a focus of our lobbying right now, it should be a focus of community action at the local level. What are we doing to educate everyone around us about the history of that and why it's important? Because, I noticed that in the State of the Union speech, Trump, right after talking about, trashing Colin Kaepernick for kneeling, in the same breath, right after he said, "And we stand for our national anthem," he then said, "And in God we trust." And that conflation of faith and patriotism, and then his weird way of connecting that to, trying to silence, voices on racial justice, that's something that we should be talking about. That's the way that "In God We Trust" is actually used. But most people, everyday people, don't think about that stuff. They're not outraged by it the way that we are. We need to get that people to be questioning it and thinking about it, because it's only when the public is kind of on our side with that we're going to get members of Congress to move at all. And I'd rather get them to work on issues that we can accomplish, rather than wave the, the flag and then have them not want to work with us at all on anything. And just so you know what we're working on right now, a great issue is addiction recovery. Because if you are mandated to attend addiction recovery, most of the time your only option is AA or 12-step, which is pervasively religious. And it's actually unusually settled law. Every single time someone has sued on it, they have won. So it's one of the few issues right now where we're not worried about the courts messing with it. So what's the problem with it is that there's not enough access to evidence-based secular alternatives like Smart Recovery and LifeRing and these other very successful secular alternatives. And so kind of like reproductive rights, you can have your constitutional right, but if you don't have access, then you don't really have access to, you're not getting your rights. And so this is a great issue for us to work on, because it has the evidence and science-based angle of, we need to promote things that work, that are evidence-based. And it also impacts our community in a very specific way. Non-theists who are dealing with recovery should have a secular alternative and have actual access to those programs. And so this year we're going to be lobbying for appropriations to go directly to expand the options across the country. And the reason it's a really good issue is because it's bipartisan, and everybody wants to do something to address the opioid crisis, right? So how great would it be for our community to be not only doing something for us that impacts non-theists specifically and it impacts the constitutional separation of church and state, but that actually saves lives, that actually has a real impact. That's the kind of stuff that we're working on so that we can actually do something that is impactful, that's substantive, that's not just symbolic, even though I agree with you, it's a huge issue, because that's what's going to build us the political goodwill later on to ask for, you know, that really, really juicy stuff like getting under God and God we trust out of there.
A significant number of the people in this room are represented by Ro Khanna. I thought he had taken a stand on this. Is he one? Do you know what his stand is as a secular person?
Wait, what do you mean by taking a stand? Taking a stand on what?
You just mentioned before, opened up for questions about the number of members of Congress who were supportive publicly.
Oh, he is not currently a member of the Congressional Freethought Caucus.
Do you know what his response was?
I don't know. I'd have to ask our lobbyist. There's a number of members who, you know, don't. I don't know. We've had a lot of issues. We'll have a member say, "Yeah, sure," and you know, when we talk to them, but then their staff kind of blocks it. You know, there's all kinds of issues. We're also our Congressman Huffman and Raskin have told us to hold off on doing a big public push. We would love to do an action alert, you know, getting folks to contact their members of Congress, urging them to join. But Congressman Huffman and Raskin want to be the first to approach their colleagues, so we're letting them kind of just do that. But hopefully, you know, in a few months or so, we'll be able to do a more public push. But what I would recommend is if you're going to go to any of his town halls or have a meeting with him, it's certainly worth bringing up. And you might have to bring it up a few times. But sometimes it's just a sense of urgency.
My sense of it is that it's more effective at fundraisers that you bring it up. I just want to make another reminder. We'll be meeting here through the rest of this month, and the first Sunday in April we'll be in our new digs at the community center in Mountain View, and you'll be hearing more about it.
Okay, so this is going to be the last question. Who? You? No. Okay. All right.
Yeah, so what you just said about the In God We Trust things reminds me of another issue. And I've gotten 2 mailings from the AHA. They want support for the fight at the Supreme Court about this Blandenberg Cross in Maryland, which apparently is just a few miles from D.C. I've kind of wondered whether or not that's worth doing. It sounds like something that you'll alienate a lot of people by pursuing that. I was wondering what you thought about it.
Well, I see lobbying and legal action as very, very different. You know, the calculus for lobbying is political. The calculus for legal is, you know, whether you can win and whether the risk, the benefits and risks of setting bad precedent or a good precedent. So I wouldn't look at those the same way. You know, pursuing. Unfortunately, you know, I've talked to the lawyers in the movement, and when that was first filed at the lower courts, there was, you know, that was before we had Trump and this Supreme Court that we have. It should have been a non-issue because there's been lots and lots of cross cases that have been easily won. It was a surprise, and it's not a good sign that it's reached the Supreme Court level. It shouldn't have ever gotten to the Supreme Court level. But that's not really something that you can predict, you know, when you have so much good precedent behind you and before the Trump administration. So generally, I mean, that's just unfortunate for us. There is a chance we might lose that case given the makeup of the Supreme Court. But I think that legal action like that is really, really important because we do have to enforce the laws that we have. Lobbying is different because we're trying to change the laws that we have. And those considerations are political, and that's when we need to really think about it. You know, unfortunately, but of course, there's still politics even when it comes to cases. So, you know, the Masterpiece Cake Shop was a disaster because they had such a, you know, the poor baker, right? You know, like you know, people in this room maybe weren't sympathetic, but they were a really sympathetic plaintiff to pick, and they did that on purpose. So, of course, there is an element of politics in picking your cases. So I would just look at, you know, how, when you're making donations, and I think you should make donations to organizations like AHA that are doing legal action, because that's also important, but just look at whether you think they've made good decisions about which cases to take, which plaintiffs that they're putting up as a public face. But I definitely think it's worth enforcing the laws that we have. Lobbying is just different, has different considerations.
Okay, so let's give Sarah a last hander.